It's a comic legend tonight. Greetings from the legendary Bob Newhart. For 7 decades, Bob Newhart made us all laugh. However, he broke down in tears during his last interview. The man who was always emotionless on film burst into tears. It occurred when the interviewer inquired about his 60-year marriage, Jenny. 3 months prior, she had just died. Everyone was astonished by what he said next, regarding their most recent talk. All of a sudden, the comic icon who always found humor in everything was at a loss for jokes. His last words permanently altered our perception of him. On September 5, 1929, Bob Newhart was born in Oak Park, Illinois. He couldn't have come at a worse time. The stock market fell on October 29, 1929, just 7 weeks later. The country entered the Great Depression as a result of Black Tuesday. The Newharts suffered along with millions of other families. 25% of people were unemployed. Not far from Bob's house, red lines extended through towns like Chicago. This challenge affected his early years. The ongoing financial concerns left a lasting impression. Nevertheless, Bob managed to find humor. Jokes were one of the few remaining comforts during those difficult times, which is where his dry, subtle humor came from. His name caused some misunderstanding of its own. In reality, Bob's birth name was George Robert Newhart. George David Newhart was his dad. George's house soon became problematic. Both father and son would turn whenever someone shouted George. The boy chose to use his middle name to make things easy. He was Bob from that moment on. That little decision followed him around forever. Offstage and onstage, Bob became his persona. His early need to establish himself gave rise to his straightforward and approachable comedy. Another aspect of Bob's environment was faith. He was raised in a Catholic household with 3 sisters, Virginia, Pauline, and Mary Joan. They frequently attended Mass. Everyday life was infused with Catholic beliefs. Mary Joan, his sister, even went on to become a nun. She committed herself to a life of service and adopted the name Sister M. Joan Newhart. Bob was a great admirer of her. He learned kindness and humility from her example. He was always clean and mild in his humor. His family's faith was the source of that. Bob acknowledged those early teachings for keeping him grounded, even as he rose to fame. Losing everything was also familiar to the Newhart family. In Chicago, Bob's father was a co-owner of a company that sold heating and plumbing supplies. However, the company failed when the Great Depression struck. They had to sell the family automobile because things got so awful. Not only did they need the money, but they were also out of petrol money. Bob's perspective on hard effort and money was shaped by the memory, which he never forgot. He would later make jokes about his family being on the verge of financial ruin. He had a ton of ideas for comedy about ordinary hardships during that difficult period. Bob's life changed again in 1952. It was during the Korean War when he was drafted. Bob remained in the United States, while many were sent to the front lines. He worked in Fort Ord, California, as a personnel clerk. He dealt with military bureaucracy, maintained records, and filed files. It opened his eyes, but it wasn't heroic effort. He saw humor in human eccentricities and red tape. His gentle, everyday humor was enhanced by these encounters. It was never Bob Newhart's intention to become a comedic icon. After leaving the service, he was hired by U.S. Gypsum in Chicago in 1954. His assignment seemed straightforward: pay salespeople and oversee petty cash. However, the actual situation was a nightmare. In an attempt to balance the bills, Bob remained up late night after night. The stats were always off, regardless of what he did. He took the cash out of his own pocket and threw it into the drawer one night, feeling worn out and angry. He then paid the difference himself if the accounts didn't balance. Although it opened his eyes, his silent capitulation did not impress his colleagues. Bob was aware that accounting wasn't his calling. His life was altered by that 1.67 error. He accepted a position at the Glidden Paint Company after leaving U.S. Gypsum. Things didn't get better. He turned down their offer to be moved to Maine. His accounting career terminated with that one choice. Resolved to choose a new route, he remained in Chicago. He managed to make ends meet by working as a voiceover artist and copywriter. However, something had changed. Bob was willing to take a chance. He would sneak into their office late at night with his friend Ed Gallagher to use the recording equipment owned by the corporation. They produced comedic recordings and sent them to radio stations. The concept was straightforward. The cost of making and mailing the tapes was $5. However, they only brought $4. They lost more money the more they sold. Bob didn't care though. He got a taste of something fresh from these sessions. The joy of making things, the elation of recording his own voice, and the defiance of the routine of his day job. Money was no longer a factor. It was about self-discovery. One of those recordings made its way to Dan Sorsen, a well-known disc jockey in Chicago. Bob's voice had a unique quality that Sorsen noticed. The tape was played on his radio program. The audience adored it. Sorsen showed it to Warner Brothers. Records president Jim Conkling. Despite the fact that Bob had never given a live performance, Conkling offered him a contract. In Texas, Warner Brothers gathered friends and employees for a fictitious live performance. Nobody anticipated the event that occurred in 1960. On Billboard, a comedy album peaked at #1. The Button-Down Mind of Bob Newhart was the title of the book. This lasted more than a week or two. Elvis Presley, and even the Sound of Music soundtrack, which dominated the charts at the time, were outsold by the record. People were taken aback. Never before had a comedy record sold so well. Bob Newhart had a distinct style. By allowing individuals to imagine the other person on the line, he conducted one-sided phone conversations that made people giggle. The CD was a huge hit because to his astute pacing and pauses. For weeks, it remained at the top. The popularity demonstrated that comedy could rival Broadway's and music's biggest stars. Then came the Grammy Awards in 1961. Bob Newhart's CD, The Button-Down Mind, won both Album of the Year and Best New Artist. No comic had ever won these honors, musicians had. The entire business was taken aback by his victory. It made a strong statement. Comedy CDs were powerful. The public's preferences were shifting. In addition to making history, Newhart's Grammy victories paved the way for other comedians. He is still among the very few comedians who have won Record of the Year. Everything changed on that Grammy night. Comedy's influence on the music industry was too great to ignore. Bob Newhart's phone routines were what made him so unique. He just played his side of the argument on the album. The audience, the opposite party, had to picture them. Occasionally, it was a historical person. At other times, it was a totally fictional person. The timing, the simplicity, and the pauses were what created the enchantment. People might identify with the circumstances. What appeared to be a routine phone call became comical. Newhart took a novel and creative approach. Later celebrities like Jerry Seinfeld and Steve Martin would claim that these routines influenced their own work. Some of the greatest examples of comedy timing are still thought to be Newhart's calls. His achievement was further validated by the charts. The most popular was The Button-Down Mind. At the same time, his subsequent album peaked at #2. The top 2 albums on the Billboard charts were by Bob Newhart. That had never been done by a comic. It wouldn't occur again until nearly 30 years later, when Guns N' Roses did it. Pop and rock stars dominated the charts at this time. It was unprecedented for a comedian to take over in that way. His first TV show was produced in 1961 as a result of his achievement. The goal of NBC's Bob Newhart Show was to capitalize on his success. The program even took home a Peabody Award and a Primetime Emmy. But Bob was miserable behind the scenes. Delivering monologues that suited his strengths, he was accustomed to working alone. He was now compelled to perform in sketches alongside other actors. He was uncomfortable. At one point, he acknowledged that he was aware of his shortcomings. Millions of Americans observed his struggles during this educational process. He attempted to quit in the middle of the season because things had gotten so horrible. For a celebrity with a popular show, that was practically unheard of. After only one season, the show was ultimately discontinued. However, it taught Bob hard lessons about creative control and had a lasting impact on humor. The problems continued after then. Bob would pay a heavy price for his devotion to his buddies. The show featured Dan Sorsen, the commentator who had given Bob his start. However, NBC wanted Sorsen removed. They believed they had more capable announcers on standby. Bob declined. He refused to turn against the man who had helped him. Behind the scenes, there were heated arguments. Bob informed the network that without Sorsen, he couldn't continue. NBC refused to back down. The show was led by them. The acclaim and the Emmy didn't matter. His first major network show was terminated by the decision. Years passed before Bob even knew the whole story. But his devotion earned him respect that no prize could ever buy. Bob's career brought him to one of the biggest stages in the world in 1964. He received an invitation to play in the London Royal Variety performance for Queen Elizabeth II. He performed on stage alongside Cilla Black, Moore Cayman Wise, and Lena Horne on November 2. One of the greatest honors a comic could receive was to perform for the Queen. Because of his recordings, Bob was already well known in Britain. However, this was not like the others. Millions of people watched. His subtle, witty humor was as effective in the British audience as it was at home. He subsequently referred to it as one of his career's high points. He demonstrated that his humor could transcend national boundaries that evening. Bob's life offstage was as impressive. Thanks to Buddy Hackett, the comedian, in 1963, Virginia Ginny Quinn met Bob. Hackett set them up because he was so certain they were meant to be. He said they would get married and even joked about naming one of their children after him, despite the fact that Ginny was seeing someone else at the time. Buddy's prophecy came true when Bob and Jenny were married in January 1963. They were married for 60 years. With her candid criticism, unwavering support, and assistance in molding Bob's profession, Jenny turned into his rock. In Hollywood, where marriages frequently end in divorce, their love tale was unusual. Bob and Jenny valued family above all else. They brought up 4 kids: Courtney in 1977, Jennifer in 1971, Timothy in 1967, and Robert in 1963. They eventually have 10 grandkids. Their life was guided by their strong Catholic religion. Twice a week, Bob attended Mass. He thought their marriage remained solid because of their beliefs. According to him, being Catholic meant putting more effort into your marriage and staying together during difficult times. Those ideals were mirrored in his clean, respectable comedy. There was something unique about Bob Newhart's 1982 comeback to television. He portrayed a composed New Yorker named Dick Eldon, who relocated to Vermont to manage a modest inn. But it was more than simply Bob's sardonic humor that truly set the show apart. It was the odd and humorous folks in his immediate vicinity. Joanna, his wife, who was portrayed by Mary Fran, contributed wit and tenderness. Tom Poston's portrayal of George Utley, the handyman, had a charming but naive charm. Then there was Michael, the anxious TV producer who was unable to unwind, and Stephanie, the wealthy maid who refused to work. However, Larry and his 2 mute brothers, Daryl, were unforgettably remembered. "Hello," they said simply. "I'm Larry." The phrase, "This is my brother, Daryl," and "This is my other brother, Daryl," gained widespread recognition in the United States. Every time they showed up, their strange antics and silent jokes caused a lot of laughter. The absurdity was made funnier by the stunning Vermont backdrop, which was modeled after the actual Weberry Inn. Dick spent 8 years trying to maintain his sanity, as everyone else went crazy. The show was a huge success because of this blend of the ordinary and the unusual. Behind the scenes, however, Bob Newhart had to deal with something much more terrifying than any strange neighbor. He almost died of smoking in 1985. He lit up even in the middle of the night because he had been smoking a lot for years. The devastation mounted. His red blood cell production became excessive. He nearly suffered a stroke when his blood became dangerously thick. When he developed an uncontrollable nose bleed in Miami, it was a warning sign. He was hurried to the hospital by doctors, who were honest with him. He had been pushed to the limit by his smoking. The scare upset Bob, who was 56 at the time. He never smoked again after quitting on that day. His health rapidly improved, and he continued to work for many more years. The actual show was a great success. It aired for 8 seasons and 184 episodes from 1982 to 1990. Not only was it well liked by fans, but critics were also delighted. It won 7 major honors and had 25 Emmy nominations. Bob received 3 nominations for Best Comedic Actor. The Golden Globes and other organizations also nominated the show. It stood out thanks to its clever writing, humorous characters, and original concepts, all of which contributed to a series finale that continues to be discussed today. In 1990, when the last episode was due, Bob and the producers managed to pull off a stunning prank. They created a phony conclusion because they didn't want the true one to be revealed. In one version, Dick encounters God and dies after being struck by a golf ball. The media was even led to believe it. Few people were aware of the reality. The audience gasped as the actual finish was captured on camera. Dick awoke beside Suzanne Plesette, his former TV wife. The entire Newhart event had been a dream, it turned out. The fans went crazy. Some have referred to the unexpected conclusion as the best in television history. Everyone was taken aback by how Bob Newhart's cinematic career began. He didn't start off with a joke. On October 3, 1962, his debut film, The World War II drama Hell is for Heroes, was released. Steve McQueen appeared in the Don Siegel-directed movie, which chronicled the dramatic tale of a tiny band of American soldiers attempting to repel a far bigger German force. Private First Class Larson was played by Newhart. Nobody anticipated that a well-known stand-up comedian would make his debut in a war picture. and it was a serious role. At the box office, the film made roughly $2 million, which was a respectable sum at the time. It became respected as a cult favorite among war moviegoers over time. Newhart's film career began with this dramatic debut, which also suggested that he wouldn't stick to playing a single kind of role. Newhart left his stamp entirely different in 1977. In Disney's The Rescuers, he was cast as Bernard's voice. Bernard was a timid but courageous young mouse, and both children and adults found the character endearing, because to Newhart's soft humor. The movie became one of Disney's biggest hits of the 1970s, and brought in over $71 million worldwide. In 1990, Newhart returned for the sequel, The Rescuers Down Under, because his work was so well received. As one of Disney's first animated follow-ups, and the first to employ the revolutionary CAPS animation method, that sequel created history. In addition to making Bernard one of Disney's most adored characters, Newhart's kind and humorous voice introduced his humor to an entirely new audience. In Catch-22, released in 1970, Newhart displayed yet another aspect of his skill. He portrayed Major, a man who was ensnared by military bureaucracy after becoming a major merely due to his name. On June 24, 1970, the movie that was based on the well-known book by Joseph Heller was released. Starring Alan Arkin and Orson Welles, it was directed by Mike Nichols. Globally, the film earned roughly $24 million. Despite initially receiving poor reviews, Catch-22 went on to become a cult favorite. Newhart shown that he could tackle serious, sophisticated material just as well as lighthearted comedy with his deadpan delivery, which made his character both humorous and depressing. He met a completely different set of fans in 2003 when he played Newhart. In the Christmas comedy Elf, which became a contemporary holiday favorite, he portrayed Papa Elf. On November 7, 2003, the Jon Favreau-directed film, which starred Will Ferrell, was released. With over $220 million in global revenue, it was an enormous success. Papa Elf from Newhart was intelligent, gentle, and subtly humorous. One of the most adored aspects of the movie was his character. Papa Elf served as a gateway to Bob Newhart's humor for a new generation of fans, including many younger ones. Newhart had 14 film appearances over more than 50 years. In 1968, he played a cunning con artist in Hot Millions, his first major role. He made an appearance in Horrible Bosses in 2011. Decades later, his films included popular comedy, cartoon adventures, and serious tragedies. Newhart always made time for movies, despite spending a large portion of his career on television. In 1992, people were thrilled to see Bob Newhart return to television. Bob was the name of his new show. He portrayed Bob McKay, a kind comic book artist who in the 1950s drew the superhero Mad Dog. The show has a clever concept. It made fun of the comic book industry and the previous attempts to make comics less violent. During the span of the show, they even issued actual Mad Dog comics. Bob McKay initially returned to work on his previous comic, but the network later insisted that the hero be more violent and dark, in line with the comics of the day. The show lost its appeal, despite its best efforts to follow. The show was rescheduled for a different night, and the cast was altered. It didn't help. It ended after 33 episodes. People were taken aback. Previously, Newhart's events were always successful, but this one didn't work out. CBS wasn't prepared to abandon Bob. CBS CEO Les Moonves wanted him back on screen in the mid-1990s. Moonves persisted in asking Bob to do it, even though he initially refused. He thought Bob still had something unique to contribute. In 1997, this resulted in George and Leo. Alongside Jude Hears, Bob starred. Both were already well known from sitcoms. The top talent was hired by CBS to work behind the scenes. They had renowned directors and writers. Though it didn't function, everything appeared to be ideal. The event got off to a great start. Even a blockbuster episode featuring well-known guest stars was canceled after just one season. Nevertheless, Moonves' endeavor demonstrated the level of confidence that people had in Bob's ability. Leo and George appeared to be a sure thing. It featured two very different fathers-in-law, Jude Hears and Bob Newhart. Bob portrayed the proprietor of a bookshop. Hears portrayed a boisterous magician with dubious connections. Jason Bateman was even inserted as Bob's son. Critics and fans disagreed, but many found the mix amusing. Some claimed that there was no chemistry between the two celebrities. Others said that viewers' preferences had just shifted. Bob demonstrated his kindness behind the scenes. In order for Hears to spend every weekend with his daughter, he rearranged the taping schedule. It was an uncommon gesture. After 22 episodes, the show was canceled. It was a daring notion that failed to resonate. Bob nearly tried again in 2001. He would play himself in an NBC pilot this time. It was intended to blend fiction and reality, much to Curb Your Enthusiasm. The pilot didn't make it to a full program, but industry people were thrilled. It's one of those TV history moments where you wish you could have done something different. Bob might have discovered a fresh approach to engaging younger audiences if it had been successful. Bob Newhart persisted in attempting to recreate the enchantment of his past performances. Both critics and fans adored his first two hits, Newhart and The Bob Newhart Show. Even the finale of Newhart is among the most well-known in television history. However, things changed after the 1990s. For most people, Bob was too strange. Though they didn't last, George and Leo had tremendous stars. Bob was unable to replicate his previous level of success, despite the support of individuals such as Les Moonves. His experience demonstrates how challenging it is to adapt to shifting preferences. Fans got something genuinely unique from Bob Newhart's tenure on The Big Bang Theory. He portrayed Professor Proton, whose real name was Arthur Jeff. At first glance, the character appeared to be a cheesy host of a children's science show. But then there came a twist that touched everyone's emotions. Sheldon Cooper and Leonard Hoffader had both grown up admiring Professor Proton. He was more than just a TV scientist to Sheldon. In a lonely childhood, he was a ray of hope. Because of Professor Proton, science seemed mystical. This relationship revealed Sheldon's more vulnerable side. That awe lingered deep within a child who had idolized a television personality. Professor Proton was given a sense of realism by Bob Newhart. His soft, sympathetic manner gave the character warmth and plausibility. The significance of meeting the childhood hero was palpable to fans. Then something happened that nobody anticipated. Bob Newhart eventually took home his first Primetime Emmy in 2014. He was 84. It was unexpected considering he had received numerous nominations for more than 50 years. Though he never won, he starred in popular shows like Newhart and The Bob Newhart Show. His performance as Professor Proton earned him the Emmy. It finally seemed like justice after all those years. His victory garnered media attention. The fact that this honor was given for a role that introduced him to younger fans was well received. It demonstrated that, despite his advanced age, Bob Newhart could still captivate audiences. Bob Newhart continued to work on the show, even after Professor Proton passed away. He returned as a spirit and counseled Sheldon. In addition to being humorous, these incidents provoked thought. They made viewers think of Luke being led by Obi-Wan Kenobi in Star Wars. Sheldon was assisted in confronting the major concerns of life by Bob's spectral Professor Proton. These scenes combined genuine emotion with humor. The way the spectral mentor gave Sheldon's journey more nuance was adored by many. There were more than one or two appearances of Bob Newhart. He made 6 appearances on The Big Bang Theory between 2013 and 2018. It was the 20th episode of the season each time. One of the amusing patterns the program likes to slink in was that small detail. Every time he made an appearance from season 6 to season 11, it was a big deal. Fans eagerly anticipated his arrival. The characters, particularly Sheldon, grew as a result of his scenes. One of his favorite recurring roles on the show was that of Professor Proton. Additionally, Professor Proton was preserved by Bob Newhart's voice, even after The Big Bang Theory concluded in 2019. Beginning April 2017, he provided voice acting for young Sheldon. He continued to mentor young Sheldon through these voice cameos. Fans felt at home with his recognizable voice. It made the two shows more cohesive. Bob's work demonstrated that, even in his later years, he was open to exploring new things. The same warmth that made his live-action moments so memorable was present in his voice. Off-screen, Bob Newhart and Virginia Jenny Quinn Newhart told a lovely love tale. They had a 60-year marriage. In 1962, comedian Buddy Hackett organized a blind date that marked the beginning of it all. They married and even had a child named after Buddy, as he had joked. One of their girls was given the name Buddy. On January 12, 1963, Bob and Jenny tied the knot. 10 grandchildren and 4 children were born to them. Even TV history was influenced by Jenny's ideas. She was responsible for Newhart's well-known twist finale. In January 2023, Jenny celebrated 60 years of marriage. 3 months later, she died. She was 82. Bob referred to her as our rock. He was devastated by her passing. Bob frequently claimed that laughter was the key to their lengthy marriage. They always managed to jest and make each other laugh, regardless of how heated a disagreement grew. The argument would then stop. Bob thought they were maintained strong by humor. He claimed that because of this, comedians' marriages frequently lasted longer. Jenny concurred. Life was just more fun with a comedian, she remarked. They were able to get through the difficult times because of the laughing that filled their home. Bob Newhart passed away in Los Angeles on July 18, 2024, at the age of 94. A 7-decade career came to an end with his death. On September 5, 1929, George Robert Newhart was born. He began his career as an accountant. With a comedy album that sold over 1 million copies and took home 2 Grammys in 1960, he rose to fame virtually overnight. He became famous because of his modest, everyday manner. He then starred in 2 popular comedies. Greats like Larry David and Jerry Seinfeld were influenced by his humor. Every laugh that Bob Newhart gave the world is a testament to his legacy.